I fought a real life Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I can't believe how popular Dogman has gotten lately, and how many different stories people have to tell. I had a Dogman encounter back in the early to mid 1970s, and when I used to try to tell people about it, nobody even wanted to hear. It wasn't a Bigfoot, so people back then told me I was just making it up. I'm going to try telling my Dogman story to my grandkids this Christmas, and see if any of them are cryptid fans. I thought I'd write it all down for you first, so I can get my memories straight in my head. I guess this was 1973 or 74, and Kung Fu was a big craze here in America. Karate, judo, martial arts in general, they were all popular. I enrolled to study Kung Fu, though, at a neighborhood dojo in the suburbs of Detroit that was taught by the toughest guy I'd ever met in my life. I had been a big fan of going camping with my dad as I was growing up, and after taking some Kung Fu classes, I started going out camping alone and practicing my Kung Fu in my bare feet, out on the hard ground all day and all night. I got more and more confident in my abilities, and I started to become cocky and careless. I was so certain I could take down any man that I forgot I was out in nature. I left too much food out for too long, and a very large predator was attracted to walk right into my camp. I had been driving over to Addison Oaks County Park to be alone and work on my martial arts for some time before this happened. I just found it mellow up there, and sometimes I would pretend it was a long time ago in the East and that I was a character in some Kung Fu movie that I had seen recently. There's a lake, and you can rent space to set up a tent away from most of the others, who are families that arrive in their trailers and campers. Sometimes their noises would come wafting over, and I found that reassuring, in case I ever had an emergency. But when the emergency finally arrived, I was hoping none of those families heard what was happening. I wanted them to stay away, because this creature and I were not pulling any punches. The creature's opening gambit was not to attack, but to surprise, to sneak, and to attempt to grab a big bag of beef jerky away from its spot, about 18 inches away from my campfire. I have never seen a wild animal walk into camp, angling for my food, or getting halfway that close to the campfire. So this guy must have been pretty hungry. Looking back on it so many years later, I kind of wonder why I didn't just let him have the beef jerky. I still had my own version of trail mix, and since that had no meat in it, I doubt he'd have been interested in any of that. I guess it was just that I was a hot-headed young guy, worked up from practicing my moves over and over. So I kind of flipped out a bit on the Dogman, kicking the beef jerky out of his hands, and landing perfectly in position to fight him further, if he didn't back off. That creature looked so surprised that I remember laughing at him. I laughed in the face of the North American upright walking canine, and I lived to tell the tale. He sort of took a step back, slowed the pace of the situation down, looked me over from head to foot. We locked eyes. His teeth were bigger than my head. I could see that even peripherally. He was growling before I even noticed it, and that made me shiver. I was genuinely afraid of him, and I hadn't been afraid of anything for some long time. In fact, the very information that I was afraid frightened me more than the Dogman itself. I had felt as though I could handle any battle when I kicked that jerky away. Already, I was wishing I knew where it landed, so I could go fetch it, and maybe avoid this fight that was about to happen. So I was still a beginner student, a yellow belt. Well, not a beginner exactly, that would be white belt, but I was not very far along in my studies. I had intended to use the little I learned in the fight, but the only martial arts concept that I had truly comprehended back then was the idea of being like the wind or like the water, and I think I learned that from some public service announcement or something. Or maybe an interview with Bruce Lee, I don't remember. So, when the dogman lunged at me, I either leaned back, or when I had the chance, I would sort of dance backward a little bit. I was no longer battling someone in my class. I was battling something that didn't even officially exist. I felt like I was about to panic, and so I unleashed a barrage of blows toward the creature's face, all of which it easily avoided. Maybe it had seen that same film clip that I had seen. One thing I had a natural talent for was doing kicks, especially the most fun kick, which in my opinion was the roundhouse kick. I decided it would only work once against a fighter as athletic and big as the dogman was, so I did my best spin, and kapow! I landed a solid hit right across the side of this beast's long, dog-like snout, which, I would like to point out, was literally over my head, even though he was leaning down. I think I was the same height then as I am now, which is 5'10". My kick was very high, and maybe hit him at around 6 feet off the ground, I guess. If he leaned down into that, maybe he was 7 feet. Maybe he was even taller. At any rate, it smacked his face to the side, and it stunned him. I could see the surprise on his huge and very expressive canine face. Again, the bipedal upright beast took a few steps back, and again, he reappraised me and the situation. This time he bared his teeth. He growled, and he walked toward me, but not at me. I was surprised and danced away a bit, giving him more room. Rather than attacking me, the immense dogman walked directly past me, past some trees, and into some bushes. I thought he was going away, but then suddenly, he reversed course and came back out of the woods, holding something. It was my bag of jerky that I'd kicked out of his hand earlier. He offered it to me. He held it in one of the claws that served as its hands, and held that arm or front leg out, fully extended, in my direction. He seemed to be handing my jerky back to me. Again, I should have just let him have it, but I was young, and I was greedy. I took what I thought was a cautious step forward to snatch at my bag of dried-out smoked cow, and that dogman easily just leaned forward and smacked me on the side of my head so hard that I bounced off a tree and then back into his paw for him to whack me back into the tree. Now, I hadn't had my behind handed to me for some time before that, but the dogman schooled me. I tried to get up to fight some more, but I could not regain my balance. I think I might have had a mild concussion. So I fell back down onto the dirt, and this seemed to calm the big dog-headed man thing down. He reached into the bag, pulled out a large hunk of jerky, and chomped down, biting half of it off with one snap of his bear-trap jaws. Taking the part that remained of the jerky, he tossed it on the ground in my direction, then turned and walked back the way he came, all the rest of my jerky in his hand, as his prize for having won our little private tournament. I had been humiliated, yes, but I had not been unfairly treated. The dogman could have torn me limb from limb. There's a lot more meat on a human than in a bag of beef jerky, believe me. He let me go, which sort of said that I didn't even rise to the level of being meat. Like I was some kind of soy product, or near meat. And you know what? I knew he was right. I couldn't deny any part of that. To me, the dogman was the greatest sensei that I ever encountered. As I progressed through rankings, for a brief while becoming one of the better fighters in my region, I always wished for a second chance to face off against the dogman. I wondered if I could win if we had a rematch. Every bit of training, every bit of practice I did, was geared toward preparing me for a rematch that sadly never happened. I camped in that same spot so many nights, for so many years, but the dogman never judged me worthy of a second chance. In my advancing years, I've met and fought some pretty good Midwestern fighters. I once partied with a guy who fought Jackie Chan in a movie, and I wanted to hear every detail. When he was done, he asked me to tell him about the greatest opponent I ever battled, and I felt embarrassed. I had to answer in a shy way. The greatest fighter I ever encountered was not a human being, but some kind of a dog-headed man, like a werewolf. This man's eyes grew wide, but not because he thought I was crazy. He started trying to say Lugaroo, but his native accent made it sound quite different. It turned out he had heard of the American werewolf that's known to live down in Louisiana. I told him that the one I fought was the northern cousin of the Lugaroo. He made his friends shut up so that he could hear my story. I lost the fight badly, as I told you, and I was honest with him about it. But he didn't see it that way. This professional fighter thought that the main part of the story was that I survived to tell it. This wasn't like a paid wrestling match or a staged fight in a movie. This was a hot-headed young guy just learning how to fight, managing to hold off a creature of myth and legend. By all logic, this professional fighter told me I should have been torn to pieces by the Dogman. I should not have lived to fight another day. Well, when he put it that way, I felt a little less embarrassed. Not a lot, but a little. He bought me a few more drinks, and then I wasn't feeling anything at all. Which reminds me, the tips of my fingers are numb, because I haven't typed this much since the 20th century. I think I'll be bringing this bird in for a landing now. I'm hoping I live another 50 years, but in case I don't, I've reserved a nice plot of land under a shady tree to be buried in. And I've already paid for a tombstone, which I would like to read. I fought a real-life Dogman.
If you want a coloring book full of monstrous delight, then give this a look. It'll give you more fright, right? Scary stories, coloring book, werewolf coloring book. And just to make your mind explode, it's a digital download. All it costs is $2.09, and then you will be feeling fine. Coloring monsters today, hey, it's a coloring book, hooray. Okay, link is in the description.
The Kangaroo Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. Do you ever get Dogman stories from Missouri? I've got a really weird one for you. So we got this place that I love to go to in the summer, called Lake of the Ozarks. The thing about this lake is that it's sort of shaped more like a river. I mean, it's this snake that winds around and around and around for miles and miles. And yet I guess it must be a lake, otherwise they wouldn't call it that. At any rate, I like to kayak on that on that lake, and I like to camp out there with whoever I'm friends with during that point in my life. These days it's me and the wife, but we used to bring the kids before they dyed their hair green and changed their gender identities. Now they don't like to camp, and really I'm fine with that. This story happened during a time when I used to go camping with my friend Manny. He was a good guy to hang with, because he liked to listen, and he didn't have too much to say. So, I was talking up a storm, and he was listening up a storm, and it was around sundown. We were walking by the cliffs on the southern side of the river, a lake, in that part of it. Right over at the very edge, though, looking straight down at the rocks and water far below, was this very large figure. Initially, I was concerned that someone was about to jump over the edge and end their life, when I noticed this out of the corner of my eye. I tapped Manny and we both looked over at this character, who then stood up at attention, facing away from us, and out toward the water. It was almost as though he had eyes in the back of his head, and he could see that we were looking at him. Well, we were looking, but we weren't sure what we were seeing. It looked like a dog, but it couldn't be a dog because it was standing up like a man, or at least like a bear. It had good posture, better than any ape I've ever seen images or video of. They slouch. This canine did not. Suddenly it spun around and was facing us, and the creature didn't seem to like what it was seeing. I bet we looked pretty scared in that precise second. But there was no fear at all in the glowing reddish-orangish eyes of the beast we were now looking at. He had to be 8 or 9 or 10 feet tall. This was something sized in prehistoric terms, not in modern man-sized terms. It looked as though it could drop to all fours and run naturally as a dog does, and yet it also looked thoroughly natural standing up on its hind legs the way that it was. My initial impression was that this beast was skinny looking. If it really was 9 or 10 feet tall, as I'm guessing, then it must have in fact been remarkably wide. I can attest that it was 2 or 3 times as wide as me, but I haven't reached that part of this incident yet. I'm trying to say that if you're as tall as this guy was, you can be wider than any man who ever lived, and yet still give the appearance of being very skinny. In fact, this creature seemed more muscular, athletic, and strong than any living thing, short of an elephant. Now, before I tell you the next and most amazing part, I want to emphasize that we got a pretty good look at this creature's face, and it was canine. It was not a rodent, like a giant rabbit. It was not a marsupial from Australia or New Zealand. This was a dog, but it stood up. Its eyes were like dog eyes. Its ears were upright triangular dog or wolf ears. Its teeth were not the kind made to eat lettuce. It had the teeth of an animal that was either a carnivore or an omnivore, but most definitely not a herbivore. This was a dogman. It was an upright walking canine, with paws that seemed partially adapted into claws, which were somewhat hand-like. I doubt he could have played flamenco guitar, but I bet he could have picked up a stone or a stick and hit me with it. And which is the more valuable skill if you're living in nature off the land? So now that I've doubled and tripled down on insisting that we are in fact talking about a canine here, I'm about to tell you something that is going to make you argue with me and tell me that I'm wrong. So first we saw that upright beast looking out over the water from the very edge of the cliff. Then it turned and growled and glared at us. So what all this was leading up to was this. That dogman leaped in the air in our direction, probably moving itself 30 feet closer to us in one impossible leap. Manny and I gasped, unsure what we should do. The dogman leaped again, jumping off both its feet at once, not unlike the manner in which a kangaroo jumps, but leaping far higher into the air and much farther forward than even the strongest kangaroo could ever hope to do. Then that monster looked right at me, bared its teeth, and leaped again, right in my direction. Manny and I screamed like 2 small children. The beast man's second kangaroo-like hop took him soaring over our heads by a good 6 to 8 inches, then another 10 feet past us further inland. Without even looking behind him, he just kept on going until he was out of our sight. Go ahead, roll your eyes. Tell me that what we saw was a kangaroo, and that I'm only exaggerating the creature's leaping ability. You won't be the first to say that to me, and you probably won't be the last either. But kangaroos have much taller ears than this creature had. They don't have wolf-like ears. I know some of them can get very big and strong, but this was not a kangaroo. This was a dog that hopped. Manny's mother says she used to know a dog that hurt its front legs and learned to walk upright on its hind legs. When it wanted to go faster, though, it would not run, it would hop, the way we saw this creature doing. It couldn't jump over your head though, so that seems to be only a partial explanation. Maybe what we saw really was a dogman, but maybe it had one or more injuries on one or both of its arms, preventing it from running when down on all fours. Might a dogman not also develop the same backup methods of movement that a normal dog would? So maybe what we saw was an injured dogman, or one that had at least once been injured on its front legs, aka its arms. It's at least one somewhat feasible explanation for our encounter with the kangaroo dogman. So who is Ms. All Business? Our new EP, she isness. Please join me in thanking Ms. All Business for becoming our newest PayPal Club member. She gets to see the 2 all-new secret uncensored stories that we just put out this week. Namely, Dogman, Gnawed My Scalp, and I Wear a Werewolf Skin to Hide My Ugliness. Both videos are available only to our club members. We have 2 clubs, and to explain how you can choose which to join, may I present our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank. Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.